A Republican representative from Arizona, Congressman John Shadegg, a guy I know very well. That's why it hurts me so much. Actually, it almost kills me to admit, John Shadegg, even though I agreed with you, just to admit on TV that you were right back in, what was that, October? Everybody else, it seems, was wrong. I've got David Brooks quotes from the end of September calling you and the Republicans in the House side that were saying, slow down, let's see about these bailouts of AIG, let's see about these bailouts of Wall Street, and let's see what's in there before we just throw trillions of dollars their way. Brooks called you a nihilist, called the Republican Party nihilistic, said you were destroying the economy and destroying the movement. What say you, John Shadegg, this morning?
Well, first of all, I say, Joe, we miss you here. It's going to be lots of fun, and
it is going to be fun today.
And it's kind of nice to be able to look back at history and see people like that make those kind of charges and say, okay, if that's what you think, that's fine. This is what I think.
John, what did you see back at the end of September during these $700 billion bailouts and these $170 billion bailouts that George Bush didn't see, that Barack Obama didn't see, that Hank Paulson didn't see, that Tim Geithner didn't see, that Ben Bernanke didn't see, that all the smartest people on Wall Street didn't see, that the Washington establishment didn't see? What did you get that they didn't?
Well, I saw what you saw when you were here and what some other conservatives here saw, which is that, look, you have to begin with a philosophy, and that philosophy can't be a belief that the government can solve everybody's problems. In this case, I love the fact that we have all these Washington politicians and bureaucrats outraged over what AIG has done and over the bonuses, and yet these are the very politicians and bureaucrats who made this all possible. And I think in many instances they knew this was coming. At least in Geithner's case, he knew these bonuses were out there, or should have.
Well, and let's talk about that. Yesterday, Robert Gibbs, our good friend, not yours, but ours, Robert Gibbs could not answer the question, who is responsible for overseeing the $200 billion in bailouts for AIG? How does that's bigger than most federal agencies in Washington, D.C. How does a White House not know who's in charge of a $200 billion bailout?
Well, I think the White House knew that the Treasury Department was responsible for overseeing this. I think Geithner was there when the deal was negotiated. This is the oldest scam in politics. Politicians create a mess, and then they come in and say, I'll solve it for you. And he wasn't going to admit that they should have been on top of it, whether they were or not. That's not his job. His job is to pretend, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was happening, but we'll fix it for you.
Let me ask you another question. A September 30th, 1999 article by the New York Times reports that Fannie and Freddie are going to lessen their lending standards. The New York Times journalist quotes several economists who say this is going to cause a situation that is going to wreck our economy. It's going to be just like the S&L crisis. Why is it that the same Democratic congressmen and senators that were pushing that in 1999, 9 years later, got to beat their chest in self-righteous indignation and then put together these trillion-dollar bailouts that started with their actions a decade ago?
Well, you're talking about Chris Dodd and Barney Frank, and they have the power, and they have now been empowered to continue to exercise that power to be the people in charge, and quite frankly, to deny reality. One of the things about the new media is you can actually go back and look at the clips of Barney Frank, for example, saying there's absolutely nothing wrong at Fannie or Freddie, and now you see him saying, well, gee, it wasn't us, it was because the Republicans wouldn't let the government regulate it.
Actually, if I can step in here, I know Barney, I worked with Barney, and I like Barney, but the quote is, when he was warned that this was going to cause the economy to collapse, he said, when it comes to home ownership, I like rolling the dice in favor of subsidized housing. Rolling the dice. And yet it's fascinating that when you asked questions in September, Barney Frank held a press conference, mocked and ridiculed you, mocked and ridiculed John McCain, mocked and ridiculed anybody that was asking questions, And yet the mainstream media just laughed along. You were called a nihilist. Nobody has still said of my friend Barney Frank, why do you lecture bankers? Why are you lecturing anybody? I don't get it, John.
Well, as you know, you can ask those questions. That's one thing, but getting coverage of asking those questions is another thing. And in the structure here, powerful people get away with changing their positions. The reality is, Barney Frank is a very, very powerful guy. And, by the way, with an explosive temperament, he gets asked questions like that, and he blows up and intimidates his accusers. It's the way this town works.
And they don't follow. So let me ask you.
But that's why on Morning Joe, you can call him to task.
Let me ask you one other question, what I still don't understand, because people like you, and also Ron Paul said something in a committee meeting on September 10th, 2003 that is stunning. He predicted everything that was going to happen. Everything. It is unbelievable. Why weren't there more Republicans who ran Congress in 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006, standing up and saying no?
Well, you're the last guy that get asked that question. I think, Joe, when you left here, there was a remnant of us kind of saying, hey, we've lost our way. We're not, in fact, reining in spending or doing what we said we'd do. We had not found our way by 2003. We had not figured out that we ought to be confronting this kind of irresponsible conduct. And those who did were kind of pushed off to the side and, for example, called nihilists.
Yeah, and so, John, was the deal also that while the economy was going up, while home ownership was artificially being elevated, Democrats could say to some of their less affluent constituents, we're helping you get in the House, and
Sure.
Republicans could do the same thing, talking about the ownership society. I mean, George Bush, Pat said this before, and he's right, Democrats like the Fannie Freddie debacle. They like the fact that they were focused more on getting African Americans into housing. George Bush and Karl Rove wanted to expand the base of Hispanic Republican voters. That was their angle. Wasn't that why everybody allowed this to go on? Because bankers made billions and politicians' approval ratings went up.
Hey, this is not Republican Democrat. This is the political class. It's the political class, including Republicans, that like to create crises and then crow about fixing them. And the political class that likes to take advantage of the good times. Those were the good times. Republicans were as happy as Democrats that things seemed to be looking good. Nobody wanted to blow the whistle, Joe.
Well, John,
come on back.
No, I don't need to come back. I'm serious. If the Republican Party wants to find its footing, they need to put people like you and Mike Pence and Paul Ryan in charge of the party. Things would change overnight. I like John Boehner, but we need young, tough reformers.
Not until we get there will we ever come back.
Yeah, no doubt about it. John, thank you for being with us.
Good to see you, Joe.
John Shadegg, thanks very much. Coming up,
Is that not unbelievable?
that was a great interview.
But is that not unbelievable? He did. We can roll the tape of him on September 30th predicting all of this was going to happen, and he got savaged by the media for saying that.
Yep.
A nihilist.
Good you put it out there. And we thank him for coming up.